Okay, so the first question was, what made you choose Colle as the subject for your book?
Ah, that's a minor, interesting little story. Um, I was looking at this book by Fred Reinfeldt, Cully's Chess Masterpieces. And the publisher I was working with in those days, Hannon Russell, he has the rights to all of Fred Reinfeldt's old books. You know, he wrote zillions of them back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so I thought, well, let's do a digital version of this with perhaps some gentle corrections to the analysis where needed, you know, computer assisted analysis. Once I got into it, I realized Reinfeldt's notes were pretty bad and needed brutal force, not minor gentle correction. And so I suggested to Hannah Russell, how about I write a whole new book about Edgard Colle? Uh, not exactly a biography, uh, not a career survey, but more an analysis of his style and trying to get to who he really was as a chess player. And so that's how the game came, or how the book came about. And this was the ultimate result. Nice cover art, I thought. Well, I should mention one other thing. When I got into the research, I came to admire Colle as a man. He played chess under considerable handicap. His health was rather poor, and yet he never complained about it. And Hans Kmoch, a friend of his, called him this chess master with the body of a doomed man and the spirit of an immortal hero. So I got kind of carried away with this romantic image. That was an inspiration. And so that made me want to find out more about Colle. That the Germans invaded and occupied his country. Um, he was born in 1897, so he was just 17 in 1914 when Germany smashed through Belgium on their way to try to take Paris. Uh, Belgium was a neutral country, and even if they wanted to, they couldn't have stopped the German war machine, which was probably the most powerful in Europe at the time. Uh, but the Germans occupied practically the whole country, exploited it ruthlessly. Uh, there wasn't quite the barbaric cruelty that the Nazis would later visit on the countries they occupied, but the Germans confiscated foodstuffs, raw materials. They conscripted thousands of able-bodied men as effectively slave labor. Colle did not serve, I guess, when the war started, age 17. He might have been considered too young. And then once Belgium surrendered, well, then what was the point, you know? So no, he never served in the military, and somehow he avoided the worst side effects of the German invasion. He didn't get conscripted. He didn't suffer some of the outbreaks of disease that the occupation conditions caused. He even was able to play some chess now and then. I think his first recorded tournament was in 1917 when the Germans still occupied the country.
And in your book, it kind of mentions that there were new ideas coming into the opening, that maybe chess was dying by the draw, I think was the phrase, something like that.
Yeah. The draw death or death of the draw. Players such as Capablanca feared that with the increasing propagation of book knowledge, opening theory and such, that anybody who was well educated in chess could draw with anybody else at will. They were afraid this would happen. Um, On the other hand, you had more dynamic thinkers who said, well, if there's a draw death, it's because chess strategy hasn't really changed since the days of Steinitz. You had thinkers such as Nimzowitsch, Richard Redi, Julius Breyer, and others who devised new original strategies, new openings, and that kind of injected a new dynamism into international chess. Then you had a player like Alekhine come along, total genius, also someone totally fixed on chess like Bobby Fischer later would be. And he really showed the way toward what became the modern method of play and study. Colle was a small part of that. He did not play for a draw. He played to win just about every time. And so I like to think he contributed to the innovations that chess went through in the 1920s. Basically, it is a system in that white can play his chosen moves no matter what black replies. Not entirely, but to a large extent. White opens with one pawn to d4, then knight to f3, then pawn to e3, bishop to d3, and usually pawn to c3. That way, if black pushes his c-pawn from c5 to c4, that gives the bishop a retreat. And then white castles, moves his rook to e1, tries to post his knight on e5, tries to get a kingside attack rolling. And it's great for beginners and inexperienced players in that it's a safe way to open. You can get through the opening without experiencing catastrophe.
And can you kind of talk about how he did against the greats of his day?
Against the greats, he didn't do very well. Colle's estimated peak ELO rating was 2490. This is something Arpad ELO calculated and published in a book of his, which I happen to have right here. The rating of chess players past and present. Very useful source for the historian. He never played Lasker. That was just how it happened. Capablanca, he played 4 times, losing all. Alekhine, he played 9 times, losing all. 2 others he never beat were Nimzowitsch and Vidmar. He drew a few against them, but otherwise lost all the games. He had a bad record against Bogolyubov, +1, -6 = 2. One of his strange records was against Savely Tartakover. He won 2, lost 7, but drew 17. So you could say he sort of held his own against Tartakover. Close to even scores against Rubinstein, Marshall, Grunfeld, Redi, Spielmann, and Marozzi. In fact, he had a plus score against Grunfeld, and against Rubinstein, he had 3 wins, 5 losses, and 3 draws. Although the Rubinstein he faced, it was all post-World War I. And Rubinstein was no longer the same as he'd been, say, in the 19 teens before World War I. He was close friends with Max Euwe. They played several matches and met in tournaments from time to time. I think Colle won the first 3 games they played, but then after that, Euwe was younger and improving. Eventually, their score was +6, -15, and 4 draws in Colle's disfavor. Euwe won 15 times, Colle won 6 times.
They didn't have obviously a rating system back then, but could you place him in, like, would he be in the top 10 or maybe if around 15 or?
Never in the top 10. there's a site you can go to called Chess Metrics, which has an enormous number of ratings, enormous number of players. And for a given player, there's usually their peak rank in the world at whatever point that may have occurred. It's not very reliable for players where there's a small sample. But with somebody like Colle, he played a lot of games. He played in 50 tournaments approximately. He was averaging 5 a year. And he was around number 20 at his best. He may have drifted up to number 14, I think was his absolute peak. But he was a variable player. His health made him inconsistent, or I should say his lack of health made him inconsistent. So on any one day, he might be the number 5 player in the world, or he might be number 500 if he was having a bad day. I found it very difficult to get biographical information about him. American and British and other English language sources didn't have much about who he was as a man, what his upbringing was like, what were his political or religious affiliations. And to find that out, I probably would have had to go over to Europe and consult a bunch of libraries there, a lot of them in languages I don't know. Colle spoke Dutch. There's no such thing as an official Belgian language. Some of the people speak Dutch, some people speak French, and there's a small minority speak something called Walloon, I think, or Wallonian. I speak Spanish and German, but not Dutch. I did find a wonderful source from a man in Belgium. His name is Nicolas Verhulst, and he has a great website with a great deal of information about Belgian chess. And from there, I got a whole lot of information about Colle, some hard to find games, some writings about him, such as the memorial book Eva wrote about him. It's called the Gedenkbuch Colle. That was published in Dutch and French. And so I was able to put excerpts from that in my book. And that was very good. I was told at the time the big expert on Colle was a Belgian grandmaster named Luc Wijnands. And I contacted him, and he basically told me to go the hell away. He was not very polite about it. And I could understand that. He wanted to write his own book. So why should he just give all this stuff for free to this American interloper? Unfortunately, he died, I don't know, about a year ago. Never published anything. So all of this material on Colle that he amassed over the years, I don't know what's happened to it. I would love to have it. I suppose it went to some friend or associate of his.
And you mentioned this before, but would you want to talk about his friendship with Max Uwe?
It's Eva. It's a little hard to pronounce. It's slippery. If it was German, it would be Eva. But the Dutch tend to pronounce things a little softer, so it's more like Eva.
Okay.
And everybody in America calls Edgard Colle Colle, which is not really either. It's more like Colle, like Culleh. That's neither here nor there. Eva and he met in a tournament in 1923. Yeah, they played a match in 1924 and really got to know each other then. They were both Dutch speaking, so that made it easy. Eva, of course, became the greater player. He eventually became world champion in 1935. And but he really came to admire Colle as a man. He said he was a man of truly great character, far above the stature of the average man. And he invited him to his home. Colle stayed with him several times. His children came to love Uncle Colle, and I was greatly saddened when Colle passed away.
Do you think he reached his full potential?
Probably so, unless that last surgery had indeed cured his ulcer. Well, his last tournament was 1931, so it was soon after that. He would have been 35 then, which is usually about when chess players reach their peak. But it really would have been interesting to see what he could have done with full health. I have a couple of fantasies about time travel with chess players. If I had a time machine, number one, I'd want to go back to St. Petersburg, 1896, and stop Harry Nelson Pillsbury from going to that bordello in St. Petersburg. Supposedly that's where he caught the disease that killed him. Or if I couldn't dissuade him from going there, give him some penicillin to cure him of it. With Colle, I wish I could take back a bunch of antibiotics. He had, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 surgeries to try to cure his ulcers, and nothing worked. And he just died from complications after the last of these surgeries. So if I could give him some antibiotics about 1924, then maybe we would have seen Colle at full health. But I don't think he was world championship material. But he would have enriched chess with many more fine games, wonderful games. You play over some of his games, and it's like, oh, wow, what a great move there! What a conception! His stuff was, his attacks were coordinated. They had a beauty like a great athlete, where there's no wasted motion and such in his best games. Other games, they were like WWE wrestling. There were people rolling on the floor and smashing into each other, and each of them taking their tumbles. And those are the games actually I like best, what I call his fighting games. And they were like a baseball game where the final score is 13-12 or something like that, or a football game where the score is 41-37. And both sides get their blows in. You take a Capablanca game, and it's like a baseball no-hitter, a perfect game shutout, 1-0, 2-0, something like that. And you can admire that artistry, but it doesn't, get you going, get your heart pumping. And Colle's games get your heart pumping. You wanted to know about how the Colle system came to carry his name. It was pretty much just a matter of him constantly playing it for years and years. The opening was known, had been played back in the 1890s. There were a couple of American players, James Moore Hannum and Emil Kemeny, who played it back then. The British player Samuel Tinsley, the Hungarian Rudolf Karuzak, and the German Horatio Caro. And then in the early 1900s, Karl Schlechter played it, Pillsbury, Rubinstein, even Capablanca played it once in a casual game. But then Colle's first time with it was in January 1923, and he just kept playing it after that hundreds of times. And so it came to be associated with him.
Were you able to find out much about his career as a journalist?
No, I don't know what papers he worked for. That was a common thing in those days. Various chess players would report on the events they played in, or they would still report on other events that they weren't participating in. Examples were Jacques Mises, the German player, and the Austrian player George Marco back in the 19th century. In fact, Mises was at Hastings 1895. He had a terrible result. He finished like almost last. And one of the main problems was he was so busy reporting on the whole tournament, he didn't have enough time and energy to spend on his own games. And so he suffered from that. Later, it seems he kind of figured out how to balance those better, and he got better results. That may have affected Culle's results sometimes too. I don't know.
You mentioned some of this before, but can you talk about some of his most notable tournaments?
Oh yeah. He he did have some good tournaments in Belgian events. He was very dominant. He won the Belgian championship 6 times. He was better than Koltanovsky or Sultan Baif or any other players that Belgium had at that time. Belgium was not has never been a great chess playing country, but however good the Belgian players were, well, they just couldn't come up to Colle. Murano 1926 was a good tournament of his. It had 14 players. He came clear first. Head of Spielmann, Shapirka, Canal, Borakostik, F.D. Yates, Ernst Grunfeld, Saveli Tartakover. Scarborough 1927. He was first ahead of 10. That was mainly a British field. He was ahead of Fairhurst, Yates, Sir George Thomas, Victor Waltuch, Berger, although somehow Bogolyubov was in there, and he came rather low in the standings. He played in a lot of the Hastings tournaments, the annual Hastings congresses in Britain. He was well liked in Britain, and he had good success against British players. In 1928-29, he shared first with Frank Marshall, ahead of Koltanowski, Yates, E.G. Sargent, Reginald Price Michel, Sir George Thomas, and others. Barcelona 1929, that was an interesting event. It's mainly a Spanish field, as you would expect, being in Barcelona. Capablanca took first, Tartakover second, but right behind them was Colle, head of a field of one Italian, I think, and the rest were all Spanish players like Ray Ardid, Manuel Gomeo de la Torriente. Oh, there was Yates was there, and Vera Minchik was there too, the women's world champion. Scarborough 1930, that was a good one for him. He was clear first, ahead of Marozzi, or Maroczy, as most people call him. Rubinstein, the German master Auris, the Indian Sultan Khan, Ernst Grunfeld, Sir George Thomas, Michel, Yates, Menchik, William Winter, and E.G. Sargent. There's a pattern to his best tournaments in that they usually have what they call a lot of rabbits in the lower half of the field. That way, Colle could, he was a good rabbit catcher. He had good results against lesser players. And so that way he could pile up a lot of points. And then if he just broke even among the top players, he could be assured of a good prize. When the field was very strong, he was lucky to end up in the middle of the standings, if not well down. I mean, you look at Baden-Baden 1925, that was a great triumph for Alekhine. He came 18th of 21. Budapest 1926, he was equal 7th of 16. London 1927, 8th of 12. Carlsbad 1929. That was one of Nimzovich's best triumphs. Ahead of Capablanca and Spielmann. Colle came 12th, 15th of 22. San Remo 1930, 11th of 16. and bled 1931, 12th of 14. And those were all very strong fields. So he was just a bit out of his depth there. But with the exception of the players I mentioned earlier, the greats he couldn't handle. He could be a threat on any given day to any player. So you couldn't count on getting an easy point off Edgard Colle.
Okay, so the next question was about his personality. There was a little bit about that in your book.
What I got from my research, and this was attested to by good friends of his, such as Hans Kmach and Max Eva, is that he was a cheerful stoic. He bore his physical hardship, the pain and debilitation caused by his ulcer, without complaint, never used it as an excuse, and always kept a positive attitude. And he could have just decided, well, I'm going to pack it in. I'm not tough enough for chess. But no, he said, I am tough enough. There's a story that I think speaks volumes about him. Kmach mentions this. There was a game which went to adjournment. It was pretty clear that Colle had a winning advantage. And it was expected that once his opponent got a chance to look over the game, he'd decide, well, I'm busted, I'll resign. No, the guy wanted to play. Colle didn't moan and beg or anything like that. He just sat down to play. And it took like 50 more moves or so, but he won the game. And I think I identified that game in my book. It was between him and the English player Fred Dewhurst Yates. And it's really a testament to Colle's fortitude, to his perseverance. One gets the impression he was a very intelligent, quick-witted guy, and outgoing, friendly, loved children, wanted to have children of his own, and he was engaged to, I believe it was one of Richard Reddy's sisters, but he died before they could be married. It's another tragic aspect besides the loss of him as a chess player. And so I never found anybody that had a bad word to say about him. And that's rather rare in chess, because chess players are so competitive, jealous of each other, zealous of their own prerogatives, that usually you'll find them complaining about something. But Colle never did, at least not in public. I would have liked to have known him. I believe he spoke English well. So we could have struck up a friendship.
I was going to ask, when you examined his games, did you see any kind of a style emerge, or is he just kind of good at every different position?
No, he was not exactly a universal player. He wasn't at home in every kind of position. Because his stamina was poor, he consciously strove for attacking play. He wanted to finish the game as quickly as possible. And against lesser players, he had a lot of miniature victories. I mean, he just blew them off within 20, 25 moves. If he had to go into an end game, his end game technique was pretty good. The only problem there, again, would be his stamina. He might, be fading by move 60 or something. He understood positional play, but because of his desire to attack, he ignored positional principles sometimes in hopes of getting in a tactical shot. He if he had mastered positional play the way, say, Capablanca, Alekhine, players like that could, along with his tactical skill, he could have been much more successful. But, there were reasons that he could not. You're asking about his personality.
Mhm.
There's the story of the game he had with Lajos Steiner, I think it was, or was it Andre Steiner? Andre Steiner, Budapest 1926. At some point in the game, Steiner knocked his own king off the board. And when he picked it up and put it back on the board, he put it on the wrong square. It was supposed to go on H1, and he put it on G1, I think it was. Yeah, it was supposed to go on H1, and he put it on G1. So then a few moves later, Steiner carries out this attack, which, if the king had been where it belonged, would have been refuted. But because the king was on the wrong square, it was successful, and thus Colle lost. And this was found out later, but Colle didn't insist that the game be replayed or anything like that. Maybe under the rules it couldn't be anyway, but he didn't make any accusation against Steiner. He was very much a gentleman about it.
Could you tell a story about him with Rubinstein and Capablanca wanted to draw?
Yeah. Let's see. That's on page 22 of my book. That's a funny one. Yeah, it was Budapest, 1929, and the two main contenders for the top prize were Capablanca and Rubinstein. Rubinstein was behind. He would have to win all his games at some point to catch up to Capablanca. So he was playing Colle, and Capablanca was watching the game closely because it affected his chances for the prize. And Colle got a position where he had a clear way to draw. He knew it. Rubinstein knew it. Capablanca knew it. Capablanca comes over and speaks to him, which I don't think they'd allow anymore in a tournament. And Capablanca comes over and congratulates him on getting his draw with Rubinstein. Colle comes back. I never play for a draw. And Colle did win. So it served Capablanca's purpose all the better. But yeah, Colle was like Fischer. He wanted to win every game. Yeah. You see, especially when he was up against another good tactician, there was almost no question of a draw. He played against the great Rudolf Spielmann 9 times. Spielmann won 4 times. Colle won 4 times. 1 draw. And all of these were just rough and tumble, knockdown, drag-out fights, and I love playing through them.
Yeah, but it seems like now, and I'm looking from 1,500 points away, but it looks like the world champions can play decisive games if they want to. With that last world championship, it seemed like they were playing. It was more exciting. There were wins and losses, and
Yeah. There was a surprising number of decisive games there, and Nepomniachtchi seemed to fall apart toward the end, but it was nothing like, say, Capablanca Alekhine in 1927, where there were 25 draws and only 9 decisive games, or the unspeakable Karpov-Kasparov match that ended up being terminated without a result. Yeah, well, they were playing according to rules that Fischer insisted on, and would have been observed if Fischer had defended his title against Karpov. But it was basically draws don't count. 6 wins had to be attained to win the match, and that was the same rules as for the Capablanca Alekhine match of 1927.
yeah, I was working on that Morphy documentary, it was that way when I looked through the First American Chess Congress book. If they had
Uh-huh.
if they had draws, it didn't count as anything. They just played again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm working on a biography of Jacques Mises right now, the German master, uh, wonderful, wonderful gentleman like Colle, had the longest chess career, professional chess career of anyone who ever lived. And there were these experiments to try to diminish draws, uh, like at Monte Carlo 1901. The first draw between two players counted as 1/4 of a point for both players. Then they had to play a second game. They switched colors and played a second game. If that was a draw, then they each got another quarter point, and okay, that was it. They were done with each other for the tournament. If one player won, he got 3/4 of a point, and the other guy got nothing more. So you would end up with a score for 2 games of 1 point for one guy and 1/4 point for the other guy. And nobody liked it. And so they abandoned all that and just went back to the standard 1 point for a win, 1/2 point for a draw, 0 for a loss.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if they had for grandmasters a no resignation rule, so I could understand why the game's over when they resign.
Well, I use computer analysis quite a bit, and so I can usually figure that out.
Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, how would you sum up Cully's chess legacy?
Ah, well, he was not the most influential of players. Um, he did leave us this legacy of a lot of wonderful games, and that's enough for anybody. I wish I could have half that many good games as my chess legacy. I've never been more than a glorified mediocrity as a player. Um, did have a later disciple, the Soviet GM Artur Yusupov, or Yusupov, I believe it's pronounced. He was a world championship candidate, very strong player, and he would play the Colle Zuckertort opening. That's a variety of the Colle system where instead of pushing the C pawn to C3, White plays his B pawn up 1 square and fiancheros his queen's bishop. The B pawn at B3 prevents Black from pushing his C pawn down to C5 to bother the king's bishop. And Yusupov had a lot of great games with that. And I became enamored of the Colle Zuckertort and played it in tournaments a lot, and got some good attacking prospects. The Zuckertort angle comes from the fact that Johannes Zuckertort played it, I think, against Blackburn at London 1883 and achieved a brilliant victory. Although that was by a different move order. I believe it started as an English opening, but I'm not sure. I don't have that game handy. And so then, besides the games, if you understand Colle's circumstances, he is just sort of a testament to the strength and nobility of the human spirit at its best, I think. And that's a good epitaph for any man.